In this video we're going to examine a key meeting that took place between Dr. Ravi Jayaram and Sue Hodkinson at the Countess of Chester in March 2017, as well as some other key events associated with this meeting. So this meeting is precipitated by this letter from Jayaram to Sue Hodkinson on the 13th of March 2017, in which Jayaram says the following. Following the session last week, I am extremely uncomfortable with the whole process, both in terms of the reasons why not all of the consultants have been asked to engage in this, but also what exactly the expected outcomes might be. Ian Harvey tried to explain, but told me that due to confidentiality reasons, he had not seen any of the written reports from the grievance process and could not give any detail. The mediator told me that this was an entirely voluntary process and I was under no obligation to engage. This is at odds with the impressions given by both Tony Chambers on the 26th of January 2017, when he stated quite clearly that the board had a plan which we were expected to follow, or we would be crossing a line. I have seen no minutes of that meeting, and also by Ian Harvey, who intimated that by not engaging, I could increase the chances of being reported to the GMC for whatever I am alleged to have done. You are probably aware that as a group of paediatricians we still have significant concerns that a number of the collapses and deaths on the unit could have been due to unnatural causes and that further investigation is ongoing. I remain troubled that the Trust is continuing to follow the plan agreed by the board in January in spite of this. I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with you in person, one-to-one in confidence, if you feel that this would be appropriate. I am free today from 1:30 to 3:30 and on Wednesday from about 11 a.m. onwards. Please let me know when you might be available to meet. So I think I would say it's quite significant that the suggestion is that this meeting should be in confidence. The other thing I would say is that throughout the documents and throughout the discussion you're going to hear in this particular video, there is what I would interpret as a bit of a self-pitying tone to the comments from Jayaram. You would actually think it was him who'd been accused of harming infants with absolutely no evidence, and you would think it was Lucy Letby who'd been found, who'd had a grievance against her and all the points had been upheld and had been told there should be a disciplinary investigation into her behaviour. As I've said previously, and I'll say this again, what was needed really was for an executive from the hospital to play hardball with them. But we're going to discover, I've mentioned this previously, but we're going to examine a key reason today as to why the executives probably didn't feel comfortable with playing hardball with Jayaram or indeed any of the other consultants. But this letter precipitates a meeting with Sue Hodkinson, which we will now assess and analyse. So this results in this meeting on the 15th of March 2017 between Sue Hodkinson and Ravi Jayaram. Now there's two particular reasons that this meeting is critical, but I'm going to go over everything that was said in this meeting so that it's completely clear. This is a meeting to discuss mediation and follow-up from email received on the 13th of March 2017. Now the reason for mediation, as we'll see later in the video, is that, of course, the administrative staff and the management at the hospital are having to speak to Lucy because Lucy's saying, right, well, I've been completely vindicated by this grievance. Why have I not been allowed to come back onto the unit? I've been out of practice now for nearly 10 months. What on earth is going on? And of course, they can't just say to her, well, you know, the consultants won't accept the situation. They're trying to get the case referred to the police. It's a very delicate situation for them, as I've said in previous videos. And even though I do think they made mistakes and they weren't transparent enough with Lucy, I think it is kind of understandable, at least to some extent, why this didn't happen. So this is why mediation is happening, because they have to say, based on what's happened at the hospital at this point, they really have to allow Lucy to go back onto the unit. Absolutely they do, because there's no evidence against her, and she's been vindicated in what has been described on this channel by people who know a lot more than me as an unprecedented manner in this grievance. So now she's holding all the cards, essentially, and she's saying, well, why am I sitting here in an administrative role? I've done nothing wrong. You've got no evidence I've done anything wrong. I've been completely vindicated, and yet I'm still sitting here. I'm not allowed to do my job. So, but then on the other hand, they've got the consultants saying, we don't want him to come back on the unit. We think they're unnatural deaths, blah, 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 as you'll see in these documents. So that's why the mediation is occurring, because they're trying to arrange a meeting, actually, between Lucy and Stephen Brewery. Now, whether they actually came face to face after Lucy was taken off the unit and then never was allowed to go back on until they were in court, I don't know. I don't know if that happened or not. It's not entirely clear to me. I don't know if it will come up at some point in a document, but it's not something I've encountered so far. But the reason the mediation is happening is to try and smooth over this situation on the neonatal unit. As I've said several times, unfortunately, there was no way to smooth this over. I think Sue Hodkinson said some very reasonable things in this meeting, but ultimately they needed to be a bit more firm and say, look, put up or shut up. Preferably shut up. But they couldn't do that. They didn't feel comfortable with doing that, and we're going to see the possible reason why they didn't feel comfortable with doing that in this document. So the meeting commenced at 2:04 p.m. between Ravi Jayaram and Sue Hodkinson. Ravi Jayaram thanked, this is written from Sue Hodkinson's perspective, Ravi Jayaram thanked for meeting with me. Understand more context around the mediation, but also raise concerns, re the patient safety concerns that he and the paediatricians have raised. I should say before I go any further that Sue Hodkinson is Director of Organisational Development and Human Resources. So they talk about the patient safety concerns first of all, and then Ravi Jayaram could not understand why only 2 consultants picked out when it should be all of them. Now, I'm not sure if he's being deliberately disingenuous or if he's just a bit thick. I don't think he's thick. I suppose that we all have a self-serving view of our own actions, and we all create a narrative of our lives in our head. And it's possible that he genuinely believed what he was saying. But, I mean, for me, this is just an utterly preposterous statement, and it's made even more preposterous by the fact that who do you think is there when the case is referred to the police? It's Brewery and Jayaram, obviously. So, I don't know how he could possibly say this. It's pretty clear from the documents we have that Brewery and Jayaram were centrally involved in this, and I don't see how they could reasonably deny that now that we've got it in black and white. Ravi Jayaram felt very uncomfortable that being asked to proceed with the mediation when the review of the unexplained cases had not been commenced. Also felt that being put in a position to undertake the mediation, as was clearly told at meeting on January the 26th by Tony Chambers, with Tony Chambers wagging his finger, that they were not to step over the line. So he states here, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to proceed with this mediation because we're not happy because there are unexplained cases. Never mind the fact that they've never put forward any evidence for any of these so-called unexplained cases. Now, of course, there are explanations now, and we know that Jayaram and Brewery were among those doctors on the unit who made specific medical errors, but they were unable to reflect on this themselves. Now, here he's I mentioned this kind of self-pitying, and I think that's a reasonable description. He's complaining about Tony Chambers wagging his finger. I mean, come on, toughen up a bit, son. I mean, you would not have liked it at the school I attended. If you can't handle that, Jesus, you don't want to go to a comprehensive school in Grimsby in the 1980s, I promise you. Of course, Tony Chambers is entitled to say, look, we've got a grievance outcome that says I can take disciplinary proceedings against you, or at least investigate this from a grievance disciplinary perspective. So, wagging the finger and telling them not to step over the line is entirely justified, as far as I can see. Ravi Jayaram described this meeting as a pantomime. I mean, he would know about pantomimes, presumably, and that a number of us were taking notes, but still not had sight of any minutes from it. So he's always complaining about minutes, but I won't dwell on that any further. Ravi Jayaram raised that he didn't understand what he had said for Lucy Letby to raise the issues and require mediation. So, pretty extraordinary, isn't it? So, he doesn't understand what he has said for Lucy Letby to raise the issues and require mediation. So, before we reflect on this any further, I think what we're seeing here is how self-absorbed some of these consultants can be. They can just throw around these accusations, completely destroy someone's life, accuse them of murder, have them thrown off the unit. Why should she require mediation? I can't understand it. I mean, it boggles the mind, truly. It truly. Imagine if it's the other way round. And I mean, he's complaining about someone wagging the finger at a meeting and said it was like a pantomime. But what's Lucy complaint? Why does Lucy need mediation? I mean, we've only accused her of murder, basically. I mean, what's the problem? Now, I should say, in the interest of balance, that what Jayaram would say is that we didn't literally accuse Lucy of murder. We never made any such statement. We just said that we were concerned. Although, of course, there is this report of Jim McCormack saying that you are harbouring a murderer. Now, he denied that, but it seems like a pretty unlikely thing for someone to make up, and he did write a letter of apology. So the facts around that haven't been entirely established, and it's not documented in the written record of that meeting. I don't think there is a written record of that meeting. It's all kind of later hearsay. But obviously in their defence, Jayaram would say, well, we didn't accuse Lucy of murder, we had concerns. But we've seen the 15th of May meeting, we're going to look at that again in this video. We know what was said, and we know they pointed the finger, and we know they identified Lucy. Now, what I will say in the defence of Jayaram and Brewery, and the consultants broadly as a group, and I'm loath to say this, but they probably thought that the police would do a better job. Now, that doesn't explain why they were so maniacally obsessed, it seems to me, with contacting the police and with the police dealing with this issue. That seems deeply inappropriate to me. But I'm sure they thought the police would do a better job, although from their perspective, they have done a good job, because they banged up Lucy, obviously. Now, I can't see any reasonable explanation for why you wouldn't have a medical investigation. And obviously, there are self-interested reasons why they might not want a medical investigation. I don't know. It's impossible for me to say. I know that I've spoken to people who are very credentialed and qualified, far more so than I will ever be, and they have said to me, I can't see any way that the consultants couldn't have known that there were problems with the unit on a medical level. It's impossible for me to agree or disagree with that. Obviously, I definitely wouldn't disagree, because people who've said that to me, as I say, are far more qualified than me. However, it's possible that they genuinely couldn't see the problems, and I do believe they were genuinely concerned about deaths on the unit, but I still don't see any justification for saying the police are the best people to deal with this, when that's very obviously not true. So there was no need for them to be so focused and so fixated on referring the case to the police. But it is fair to say that they didn't specifically make accusations, but they made very, very strong insinuations, and those insinuations got much stronger when they spoke directly with the police. And of course, we know there's this peak, the police email from the 4th of May, and we know what happened after that. And we're going to discuss that issue further as we continue with this video. So the next thing is that Sue Hodkinson explained the process of mediation and how feedback had been provided. Sue Hodkinson will obtain extracts of the grievance to share with Ravi Jayaram, which reference the information related to him. Ravi Jayaram said that would be helpful. He explained that he didn't see how helpful and useful the mediation would be, as he would need to be open and honest, and if asked about if he thought it was her, he would have to say we can't explain the unexplained deaths. He feels compromised, as Tony Chambers said about crossing the line, and heard from others possible disciplinary action, but also told by Ian there could be repercussions from others re General Medical Council referral. Doesn't want the mediation to compromise his position. So as I've said numerous times, and I'll say it again, the reason they didn't go to the police directly was because they knew that if nothing came of it, then that would have been really on the block then. It's as simple as that. There's no other reason for it. If they're so concerned about a police referral, they can pick up the telephone, quite obviously. The reason they won't do that, and the reason he won't do that, you've read this here, it's there in black and white, he doesn't want his position to be compromised. And if he did that, let's say he did that, Evans didn't read about it in the paper, as he claims, Evans wasn't available, and another medic had gone in there, and they said, well, I don't see anything unnatural about any of these deaths, and the police closed the investigation, or maybe they couldn't even contact anyone at all. Maybe they couldn't even get a medic to go in there, because at first they weren't even going to investigate. So let's say they don't even launch an investigation, and it goes back, then the position of Brewery and Jayaram are pretty vulnerable, I would say. So that's why they didn't go to the police, and he's really just essentially admitted it here, but he admits it in the 15th of May discussion as well, where he talks about whistleblowing. He says, if I go to the Care Quality Commission, that's whistleblowing. I don't want to be a whistleblower, obviously, because we know what happens to whistleblowers. Sue Hodkinson explained how the process would take place and that it was about two people working towards working with each other in the future. You wouldn't think you need to explain that, would you? This is what a mediation is. Let me just explain to you what the word mediation means. Let me explain to you what's happened in the hospital. Ravi Jayaram advised he felt more comfortable with proceeding with the mediation. Ravi Jayaram asked Sue Hodkinson if Stephen Brewery could also discuss this with her, and Sue Hodkinson agreed. Ravi Jayaram asked how the board were advised about the process of the reviews and how they were assured that nothing further was happening, as this was at odds with how the paediatricians viewed the report. The Royal College report is purely a service review. Jane Horden's review is clinical but indicated more forensic review of the 4 cases. Then in the meeting with Ian recently with Stephen Brewery and Nim, this is Nim Subedar, I think it's pronounced, spelled Subhedar, reviewed a further 4 cases and identified a further 5 where no deaths but unexplained deterioration. Felt that the board were being misled by Ian, only an orthopaedic consultant. Did the board not have a neonatologist taking them through the review? Ironic, isn't it, that they're demanding a neonatologist? I mean, I don't suppose the irony of that was pointed out to him at the time, but... and some of these comments, let's be reasonable, are fair. It is true that the Royal College report is a service review. There had been a lot of reviews of the infants. It's not unreasonable for them to ask for a multidisciplinary review, as they mentioned in the 15th of May meeting. That's one of the most reasonable things that they said. There should have been a multidisciplinary review, arguably. If anything is going to happen at all, that's what should have happened. Why they think the police are the best organisation to conduct that, I have no idea. But I will repeat, they probably genuinely thought the police would do a better job than they did. Little did they know that the crap process the police put in place was actually going to exonerate them and convict Lucy Letby and put her away for a very long time, indefinitely in fact. But I'm sure they thought the police will do a good job, they'll bring in multiple medics. They won't just let one retired paediatrician walk in and say, well, don't bother speaking to anyone else, just leave the notes with me. So it continues, someone with experience of the symptoms, the babies, feel the board has been wrongly advised and this is causing significant concern for the 7 paediatricians, feel there is a disconnect between the board and them. Ravi Jayaram advised he has read about whistleblowers in other organisations and those who raise concerns, and they feel they are being treated by the board like this. Board going down a path and set on the path. So let's be clear, Rav, just so we're clear, you're not a whistleblower. I've got absolute cast iron evidence in my book that you're not a whistleblower. So, don't delude yourself. Just saying stuff in your workplace does not make you a whistleblower. You have to go to an external organisation, which you didn't do. So you're not a whistleblower. So forget about that. And what I will say as well is these comments, they pretty much vindicate everything that I've said. This is why they won't go externally. It's why they want to call the police in, but they don't want to go to the police themselves. Making decisions around members of staff returning and think they may have been misled. Sue Hodkinson advised Ravi Jayaram that Speak Out Safely policy incorporates whistleblowing and patient safety concerns encouraged for everyone, concerns treated under the policy. So I believe she says more about whistleblowing later in this document, but she's just saying here, look, if you want to whistleblow, this is what you do. The policy's laid out for you. If you want to blow the whistle on management or on what's gone on at the hospital or concerns that you have, then the pathway is clear. But obviously they didn't do that. Ravi Jayaram raised concerns regarding losing confidence in Tony Chambers, Ian Harvey and the board. Feel bullied and intimidated to just accept it, the plan. Feel being pushed back onto the consultants, our fault. Well, the onus is on you to actually produce something. You've requested, there's this extraordinary situation where Lucy's been thrown off the unit entirely because of you, and then she's been vindicated by the grievance, and now they're trying to mediate. You need to have the word mediation explained to you because you don't seem to know what a mediation is, which I think it's like fairly common knowledge what a mediation is. And now I'm not really sure what you're complaining about exactly. Obviously, the ball is in your court. You now need to produce the evidence regarding your concerns, or you need to whistleblow. You need to do something. You can't just sit there saying, it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair, everyone's been horrible to us. Preposterous, embarrassing, juvenile. Alison Kelly praised her nurses, offered support. What would you expect her to do? What would you expect her to do? Sit there saying, oh yeah, obviously you're right about everything, even though there's no evidence. I'll just completely shit on my nursing team. What would you expect her to do? Like, you lot stick together, obviously. The consultants stick together. Maybe nothing else would be expected. I don't know. What do you expect Alison Kelly to do? What else can she do? Medics had nothing from Tony Chambers and Ian Harvey. All started with Tony Chambers meeting in September, re the ninth consultant. Poor communication. Could have made a complaint then about his behaviour. Talk about trust values and behaviours, but Tony Chambers didn't display those then. Only found out about the ninth consultant when spoke to medical staffing team that had been pulled. Feel that the board want us all to leave. If Tony Chambers really wanted this to work, would be thinking about STP and pushing as hard as he can to get the unit back to level 2. We feel we are not wanted. I mean, this is utterly preposterous. It's like a child throwing the toys out the pram. Obviously, very obviously, the board don't want the entire paediatric consultant team to leave the hospital. That's just a ludicrous assertion that is just completely without foundation. This is already serious for them, because as you've just noted, the unit has been downgraded to a level 1 unit. Obviously, we know now, with the benefit of hindsight, that it would never be returned to level 2 status, and that's probably a wise decision, you'd have to say. The idea that the board, they're already facing undeniable scrutiny and probably criticism for allowing the neonatal unit to be downgraded. Why would they want their entire paediatric team to leave the hospital? I mean, this is just, again, it's hard to describe it as any other way than self-pitying. It's as if there can be no legitimate reason to criticise us because we're paediatric consultants and we're beyond criticism. That's really what would come out of it for me. Of course, you're going to face criticism if you have a nurse thrown off the unit, and then it's found out that all 7 points of agreement are upheld, and you don't provide any evidence for why you want her thrown off the unit, and you're not willing to whistleblow, and you're not willing to go to the police, and you're not willing to put your money where your mouth is, and you're not willing to engage in a mediation, although I suppose you've got the defence of not knowing what a mediation is. What do you think is going to happen? Of course you're going to be criticised, and of course the board are going to be a little bit annoyed with you and tell you not to step out of line and even wag their finger at you, you know. I think the expression is you need to get your big boy pants on. So the next paragraph, which I've referenced previously but I don't think I've ever read out on this channel, is critical, and there's a couple of points that I need to make about this, but I'll read the paragraph first. Ravi Jayaram raised that he has written his resignation, 3 of us all actively looking, feel I can offer more outside of the organisation to patient safety as not wanted here. Sue Hodkinson reiterated the board and Sue Hodkinson does not want Ravi Jayaram or any of the team to leave. They are valued and we have to learn from if things have not gone right. So, on the one hand, he's saying, oh, it just feels like they want to get rid of us. But then he's saying, oh, we're actually actively looking to leave. Now, I personally think this was a completely hollow threat. But this would be, the second point is, this would be a good reason why the executives didn't play hardball with them, as I've suggested that they should have done, because they were probably genuinely concerned. They might be looking elsewhere. They might look to leave. If we lose 3 of our paediatric team, they're not going to be easy to replace. So we need to handle this very carefully. Everything has been such a treading on eggshell situation for the executives, and this just makes it even worse. So this was quite a clever strategic move. I don't suppose for 1 second they had any intention of leaving the hospital, because as far as I know, they're still there now. So it would be a similar situation to Lucy, where they would have ties in the area, they would have been there for quite some time, they'd obviously have housing there, and so on and so forth. So they wouldn't usually make a parallel move to another hospital unless there was a very good reason. I don't think like someone wagging the finger at them is really a good enough reason in the highly pressurised environment of a hospital and a neonatal and paediatric unit. I know that when I've obviously, as you know, I've spoken to many other medics, nurses, etc., and not many of them talk about moving around very much because you want to weave yourself into the fabric of a certain hospital and then progress on that basis, and you want to build working relationships, you want to know the setup, and I'm sure qualified people would give a million other reasons why you don't move around from one place to another. I'm sure it doesn't look great. In other walks of life, it's fine, isn't it? You know, if you want to get to the top in the corporate world, if you want to climb the corporate ladder, you often make either just slightly upward movements or parallel movements into a slightly better salary, into more responsibility, and so on. And it's not frowned upon. You do 3 years at one company, then 3 years at another, and before you know it, you're at the top if you excel. But in a hospital, you don't. I'm not saying you don't ever move, but you don't move unless there's a very good reason. And a parallel move, they're not talking about an upward move, seems to me to be pretty unlikely. So, I mean, to me, this is just an idle threat, but it's very important because it gives you context as to why Ian Harvey and Tony Chambers perhaps acted the way that they did. Ravi Jayaram added that the board are more worried about an employment claim worth hundreds of thousands from the member of staff concerned than patient safety. Sue Hodkinson added that we are supporting the member of staff to return to the unit. We hope she stays, but she may stay and then decide to leave, and we have to manage that. However, patient safety is paramount, and other decisions do not override that. So, I do think, that's an unfair statement, obviously, from Jayaram, but I will say, and I think this is a fair comment, that I'm sure they were genuinely concerned about patient safety on the unit. I have said previously, once they've had this grievance go against them, it's becoming a them or us situation for them, possibly. But I do think that certainly initially there was a genuine concern about patient safety. Now, how it was that they weren't able to reflect on their own failings and the problems on the unit and so forth, again, it's very difficult for me to give an opinion on that. I was certainly of the opinion that, and I still think it's feasible that maybe they just didn't understand. Maybe they didn't, no one deliberately makes mistakes. So if you made mistakes, it's possible that you wouldn't know they were mistakes. However, I have heard opinions from people who know more than me who said that they believe that's highly unlikely. It's impossible for me to say one way or another. But it's rather, melodramatic to say that the hospital aren't concerned about patient safety. Of course, the hospital will be very concerned that the neonatal unit has been downgraded and that infants have died. Of course they will. Ravi Jayaram added again, concerned the board have been misled. How have the board been assured that the information is sufficient? Ravi Jayaram reiterated comments re Ian Harvey. Sue Hodkinson explained that the board were assured on the plans and the information provided by the clinical review. Ravi Jayaram could not understand how we were so far apart and disconnected in our views, feel not being listened to, don't feel valued. It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's like, to me, like, I just can't get my head around this. Like, the extent to which they need to be patted on the head and, oh yeah, you're so important to us, you're so important to us, oh, we love the paediatric team, oh, you're amazing, oh, you're a wonderful human being, oh, you're great, oh, we listen to everything you say, oh, we disregard everyone else. I find it mind-boggling from an adult. This guy's, he's not even a young adult. It's not even a young adult. It's not like they're just fresh, wet behind the ears, fresh out of university. This experienced guy, I forgot how old he was, but wasn't he late 40s or 50 or something? He's certainly not in his 20s, and he's certainly not a child. I just find it an extraordinary way to behave, personally. Now, obviously, also, I will say, they may not have been entirely satisfied with the information that's been provided, even though we know there's been Jane Horden, McPartland, the Royal College. There's been a lot of examination of these infants without anything suspicious being upturned. However, they may genuinely not be happy with that, in which case it is their job to ask for an external medical review. They actually had problems with this because in another document they couldn't actually agree on what a forensic review constitutes. There's quite a comical discussion where they try to work out what a forensic review actually is. But there could have been a further multidisciplinary review, that's not unreasonable, but they would have needed to push for that. What they really wanted was the case to be referred to the police. They made that very clear. It'll become clearer in these documents, and then we know what happened when they went to the police. So then Jayaram has said that the consultants don't feel able to raise concerns, but feel this is the first time really able to have a conversation and being listened to about the issues. Ravi Jayaram thanked Sue Hodkinson for making the time to meet with him. Didn't have confidence in other members of the board, but respected what I was trying to do. Always treat people and everyone with respect. Feel he could have an open conversation with me, but very concerned that as I and other members of the board, non-clinical, we have been misled. Ian should have provided more information. So what I would say with regard to that is that I don't know how they get this idea that they're not being listened to, because something extraordinary happened. Someone was taken off the unit and taken out of her job and put in an administrative clerical position entirely on the basis that they demanded this. And I think that is, we must say in mitigation, we always must say this, they are responsible for the unit, they are responsible for clinical performance of the unit, and they are responsible if an infant dies. So they do have to take that very seriously, and it's absolutely right that they should express concerns. That's not an unreasonable thing to say. But the idea, they seem to have this, Jayaram in particular, I don't know about the others, but Jayaram in this conversation and in others seems to have this bizarre view that somehow he's being discriminated against when nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it's a complete detachment from reality, I would describe it as. So then Ravi Jayaram said that with duty of candour, he feels he should say something. He wants to raise this with the Care Quality Commission as feel the board is not listening. Ravi Jayaram describes circumstances at North Staffordshire Board on a path and wouldn't listen, and whilst much wider issues than missed many patient safety concerns and issues, that's not a particularly clear sentence, feels that he should be raising this. Sue Hodkinson added that any member of staff, and particularly healthcare professionals, can raise concerns to Care Quality Commission or to the police. We wouldn't prevent anyone from doing that. We need to think about what steps we can put in place to move this forward. So Ravi Jayaram says, right, we'll go to the Care Quality Commission. Very obviously, that's what they should have done. Sue Hodkinson rightly points out, you can go to the Care Quality Commission and you can go to the police. Not only, I mean, Sue Hodkinson says we wouldn't prevent anyone from doing that. They can't prevent this. There's nothing they can do to prevent this, even if they wanted to. There's a clear pathway to the Care Quality Commission. The police obviously is not unprecedented, but it's considerably more unusual. But no one can stop them from picking up a telephone and going to the police, obviously. But they don't want to make themselves vulnerable. And in the end, they managed to manufacture a situation where the police were contacted and they got to have their say and they took no risk. And that's what they always wanted to do. Ravi Jayaram then added one thing that bugged him was on lead up to Celebration of Achievement Awards, he was told to stick to the script. Wouldn't use an event like that to say things, not his style, wish this hadn't happened. It's just more moaning, basically. Sue Hodkinson explained that she'll take responsibility for that. She was the lead and should have had a conversation with Ravi Jayaram about it. Sue Hodkinson provided apology. So there's some discussion about the mediation, about how they can move forward. There's discussion about having a meeting between Ian Harvey and the paediatricians, blah, blah, blah. That's not particularly interesting. And then Ravi Jayaram says, we need a full and frank discussion. Jayaram stated that with what you have sent to me today and the board has been misled, we need to discuss that the plan has been based on a misinterpretation of the two reports. We need to be reassured and feel very uncomfortable that we need an explanation for the unnatural deaths beyond reasonable doubt. So that's not entirely unfair. It's incredible that there have been all these medical reports and they're not willing to accept them at all. But I'm only repeating myself, really. What they needed to do was have a multidisciplinary review, an external medical one. So then we move on to a critical paragraph that I really want to discuss. So it's stated here, Ravi Jayaram added that all discussed concerns re Lucy Letby but all circumstantial. However, he remembers 3 occasions when there were concerns. So I want you to know exactly what is said here. One where baby deteriorated and Lucy Letby at end of cot. Another where valve at different setting and it was explained that it was a mistake when she was looking after the baby. And a third. All feel really uncomfortable, not personal but cannot explain. So I'm not going to read the rest of this document. This is a key paragraph that I want to focus on, and I want to compare this to what he said on the 15th of May. So this issue about the valve, I don't think ever appeared in the court case. As far as I'm aware, it never appeared in the court case. But if it did, I would suggest that's a little bit hypocritical, considering that we know for a fact that, for example, in the case of Child O, the consultants and doctors on the unit ventilated the infant at completely the wrong settings, and that was critical in the demise and death of the infant. Let's not even go into the needle aspiration. That didn't even need to happen, let alone it was conducted incorrectly, but they didn't even need to aspirate. So we don't know what the third thing is because there are absolutely no details, but the first one, incredibly euphemistically, appears to be a reference to Child K. Now, it has been said that this is the first time that he brought up Child K, but I would challenge that, because I would say that the details that he gave here are nowhere near enough for anyone to conclude what the accusations were. He didn't even say the word tube. He just said a baby deteriorated and Lucy Letby was there. On what level would you think that? I mean, clearly there isn't an explicit allegation. If you heard that, you would think, this is ridiculous, Rav. You know, there's going to be a nurse there when a baby deteriorates. It doesn't mean anything. And there are no specific references to the allegations that later would appear in relation to Child K. Now, some people say this is the first time that he mentioned Child K and mentioned the tube extubation. I strongly disagree with that, because I don't see the word tube, and I don't see the word extubation, and I don't see any specific reference to the infant. So he does very euphemistically reference it here, but I don't think you can say this is an explicit accusation. Well, you can't. It clearly isn't. Now let's compare that to what he says in the police discussion on the 15th of May. So here we have Dr. Ravi Jayaram in the police station in Chester, in Blacon in Chester to be more precise, on the 15th of May with Dr. Stephen Breary and with Susie Holt. We don't hear much from Susie Holt, who was, I think, on a 6-month placement at the time in this meeting, but I've highlighted what she said. There's a standalone video on Susie Holt. Breary says many things. I've been over this meeting previously. But what I want to note about what is said here, firstly, of course, we know that Jayaram writes this infamous email about piquing the interest of the police, and then in the notes of this meeting that are compiled by Nigel Wenham, this is literally the first thing that Jayaram says. He makes this comment about the staffing review, has looked at the notes, blah, 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 and then he says, I can speak about one that did collapse, but survived, 27 weeks, was stable, had breathing tube down, good ventilation, named nurse, i.e. nurse assigned to care for baby during that particular shift, had gone out of nursery, I went back in, the baby's oxygen levels had dropped, first thing to do, disconnect baby from ventilator and bag, I noticed the breathing tube had been dislodged. The nurse was present at the time. Now compare that to what he said in the meeting with Sue Hodkinson, and that's the only time that we can see in a written document, and certainly at the time this is referred by the executives, they don't know anything about Child K, and it was deemed unsuspicious when Dr. Evans reviewed the notes. Even Dr. Evans couldn't find a reason to be suspicious here, because this infant was chronically unwell and died 3 days later at another hospital, sadly. So contrast this with what he said in the only time that he made even the most euphemistic reference to Child K. So this is definitely the first time that he explicitly makes these comments about a tube having been dislodged. He identifies the infant and he identifies Lucy Letby in context. This is the first time. The first time he mentions it is when he's in a police station. So there are a lot of other documents that I could show you which give more indication of what was occurring at the time. And I'll perhaps go through these on another occasion, but I just wanted to establish a few things with this video. The first thing is that it was a very difficult climate at the hospital for the executives, and I think it's clear that there is no prospect that Lucy could have gone back onto this unit, considering they weren't willing to engage in any form of mediation with her. There's just no way it was ever going to happen, and if it had have happened, it wouldn't have been safe for her. I understand why she wanted to do it. The more that I look at this case, the more documents I read, the more that I learn. It's clear that Lucy wanted to resurrect her image as a competent nurse, as she was doing in the PALS section. There's actually a document that indicates that she'd been lumbered with a really high workload there because she was really good at her job, so they gave her more to do in clerical duties. So it's just bizarre and crazy what's been allowed to happen here, but unfortunately there was no way. The only way she could have extricated herself from this is going for constructive dismissal. It becomes clearer and clearer the more that I look at and the more that I discuss on this channel. So Jayaram stated that 3 consultants were on the verge of leaving the hospital. So I don't know if this was an idle threat. It certainly sounds like the sort of thing that could be, but it's also possible that they were looking elsewhere. There were consultants who left this hospital. There was a certain amount of turnover of staff even during this 2015 to 2016 period, so it's possible. But I think this is a major factor in why the executives felt that they couldn't be more forceful with the consultants, because they were making these kind of threats, whether they were threats that had substance or not. It's in a sense it's irrelevant, because the executives just couldn't take that chance, I guess. The very, very important thing we've established is that Jayaram never mentioned the tube extubation at the Council of Chester. Now, we don't know what was said behind closed doors. We don't know what was said privately among the consultants, but certainly in any document that's been submitted to the Thirlwell Inquiry, of which we are aware, in conversations with staff at the hospital, he never mentioned the tube extubation. He very euphemistically references what we can presume to be child K, but you see the difference between this and what he says at Blackham Police Station. Because as soon as he appeared in Blackham Police Station, he immediately referenced this supposed tube extubation very explicitly, so there could be no misunderstanding. This meeting had of course been precipitated by the infamous Preceding email in which Jayaram talks about piquing the interest of the police, and of course we also now know that he had previously given a completely different account of this incident, which is in no way incriminating for Lucy. So some interesting information there, which I think explodes a few myths and provides a bit more background to what was happening at the hospital. But the key thing is, it's been suggested by a few people in a few different sources that Jayaram mentioned the tube extubation for the first time in this March meeting with Sue Hodkinson. I would disagree with that. I don't think he does mention it. He does euphemistically reference child K, but he never says the word tube. He never says the word extubation. He never gives any details. As soon as he's in the police station, immediately the first thing he says are all of the details related to child K.